"You filthy animal." The words didn't just land, they detonated. 30,000 feet above the Pacific, in the polished hush of first class, the insult cut through the cabin like a blade through silk. Heads snapped up. Wine glasses trembled in startled hands. And at the center of it all, a woman in a cream sweater, her hands folded calmly against her chest, took the full weight of the storm. The flight attendant's fist hovered midair, her other hand twisted into the collar of the passenger's sweater, yanking it forward as if she could tear her dignity away with fabric. Her voice was shrill, practiced in command, but poisoned with contempt. The black woman she clutched did not scream. Her eyes widened in shock. Yes, but beneath the gasp, beneath the raw insult, there was something else, something unmovable, silence that held, silence that judged. Around them, the cabin fractured into chaos. A woman in a mustard blazer fumbled with her phone, thumbs shaking as she hit record. Another in violet leaned halfway into the aisle, whispering, "Oh my God," under her breath. A man in headphones slid them down and stared, his jaw slack. None of them intervened, not yet. The captain himself appeared from behind the curtain, his tie straight, his face pale. He froze at the sight, the blue, uniformed attendant towering over a seated black woman, hand raised as if discipline had become assault. The accused passenger, our protagonist, wasn't dressed for power. No diamond studs, no silk scarf, no Rolex ticking under her sleeve. Just a soft, knit, dark trousers, hair tied back with quiet care. To strangers, she looked ordinary. That was the point. She had boarded this flight without entourage, without markers of wealth, invisible on purpose. But the invisibility was never hers to keep. It was always theirs to weaponize. The attendant's words spat again, louder, for every seat to hear. "She doesn't belong here. This ticket is fake. She's trying to steal a seat in first class." Gasps scattered like turbulence. A white couple 2 rows down exchanged smug glances, as if the accusation confirmed what they had assumed all along. One leaned forward, smirking. "Looks like someone thought they could play rich." "Oh." The black woman's breath was shallow, her sweater clenched at the collar, but her gaze lifted. She looked not at her accuser, but at the witnesses the cameras raised, the mouths hanging open. Her silence pressed on them, a question without words. And then, still caught in the attendant's grip, she moved only her lips. 3 words, calm, steady, directed not to the uniform towering above her, but to the passengers recording. "Do you see?" The cabin froze. Phones stopped wobbling. Eyes narrowed in sudden recognition. It was no longer just one woman under attack, it was the spectacle of bias, performed live at cruising altitude. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The scene had already ruptured. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. The attendant's hand trembled, still clutching the sweater, but her confidence swelled with the silence around her. She mistook restraint for submission. She mistook patience for weakness. That was her first mistake. The cabin didn't breathe. The air itself seemed to stall, as if the engines had paused their roar to listen. The attendant's grip loosened just a fraction, but her voice kept cutting. "She doesn't belong here. Look at her cheap clothes, no jewelry. First class isn't a charity." A chorus of whispers rippled through the rows. Some leaned forward, eager to see humiliation. Others turned away, uneasy but silent, their silence loudest of all. The woman in the cream sweater sat perfectly still, her collar tugged low, her posture forced awkward by the attendant's hand, but her eyes never blinked. Her name was Dr. Naomi Ellis, though no one on this flight knew it yet. 43 years old, daughter of a postal worker and a nurse. Builder of an empire that now spanned renewable energy, tech investments, and board seats at 3 Fortune 100 companies. On this flight, she was not the billionaire, not the CEO, not the owner of shares in the very airline that had just tried to erase her. She was simply another passenger who had dared to board quietly, and for that, she was now a target. Naomi had chosen the sweater deliberately. No designer tags, no statement purse, just anonymity, wrapped in cotton. It was an old habit testing the room she entered, measuring which doors opened when she walked in dressed as herself, not as her resume. She had walked into banks, hotels, dealerships this way, and each time she'd met that same narrowing of eyes, that same suspicion sharpened into hostility. She remembered Atlanta, age 25, trying to rent her first condo. The agent's smile curdled when she showed her ID. "This neighborhood isn't for you." He hadn't said why. He didn't need to. She remembered the weight of her car keys in her pocket, the sting of being turned away while white couples toured the property behind her. That memory had built her resolve like steel folded under flame. And now, decades later, here it was again. Different sky, same script. A man in a gray suit rose 2 rows behind, his brow furrowed, voice careful. "Excuse me, is this necessary?" She showed her boarding pass. The attendant whipped her head toward him, still holding Naomi's collar. "Sir, please sit down. This is protocol." Naomi's lips curved, barely. That word, protocol. The shield people always used when cruelty wanted a uniform. Another passenger, a young woman in purple, lifted her phone higher, recording every second. Her whisper carried across the row. "This isn't protocol. This is harassment." Naomi inhaled, steady. The leather beneath her hands creaked softly as her grip tightened, not in fear, but in restraint. She would not give them the performance they wanted. No raised voice, no wild gesture, just patience, just truth, waiting to be spoken. The captain lingered in the aisle, frozen between loyalty to his crew and the unraveling dignity before him. His silence was louder than the engines. Naomi finally spoke, low, controlled, directed at the uniform inches from her face. "Release me." 2 words. That was all. But the way she said them, the gravity in her tone, the command wrapped in quiet shifted something in the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances. A mother with her child clutched the girl's hand tighter. Someone whispered, "She sounds in charge." The attendant hesitated, grip faltering. And in that hesitation, the seed of doubt was planted. The attendant finally released Naomi's collar, but not her contempt. She stepped back just enough to breathe, her voice pitched loud for the cabin. "She's not a verified passenger. People like her print tickets at home all the time. This isn't new. People like her." The phrase landed heavier than turbulence. Passengers shifted, some wincing, some nodding, others pretending not to hear. From the cockpit curtain, the captain's shadow loomed but offered no command. His silence was permission. Another figure appeared. The purser, mid-50s, square jaw, silver tie clip catching the overhead light. He walked the aisle like a judge summoned to deliver sentence. His name tag read, Mr. Douglas, but the way he scanned Naomi, it might as well have said executioner. "What's the situation?" he asked sharply. "She tried to sit in 2C with a fake ticket," the attendant answered, voice trembling with the satisfaction of being backed. "Boarding pass destroyed for safety." She held up the torn paper as evidence. Naomi's hands remained folded in her lap. Her eyes lifted slowly. "Destroyed," she repeated, voice calm, as if tasting the word. "Yes," Douglas barked, "for verification, and until we confirm, you will vacate this seat immediately." The man in gray suit stood again, more firmly this time. "Sir, I watched her board. Her scan was green." Douglas cut him off with a single glare. "Sit down or you'll be removed for interference." Phones lifted higher. A ripple of murmurs spread. "Removed? For what?" Naomi didn't flinch. She turned her head, gaze steady on Douglas. "You claim protocol," she said softly, "but you didn't even check the system before you tore it up." "Oh." Her restraint unnerved him. He adjusted his tie, bristling. "Ma'am, you're holding up operations. Your appearance alone raises questions. No designer luggage, no status markers, no record of you in our premium database. This is suspicious." Her appearance. That was the evidence. The cabin felt smaller, charged. Every row now carried witnesses, their screens glowing red with record lights. A young woman across the aisle spoke up, trembling but clear. "I work in IT. If her scan went green, the system verified her identity. The rest is your bias." Douglas snapped, "Stay out of this." Naomi closed her eyes briefly, inhaling as if gathering not patience but memory. 20 years ago, a loan officer had leaned back in his chair, scanning her thrift store blazer, and said almost the same words. "Your appearance raises concerns." She'd walked out of that office with no loan, but with a blueprint for the empire she would build without them. And now, on this plane, the refrain returned another wall, another gatekeeper, same playbook. She opened her eyes, sharpened now. "You have a choice," she said to Douglas. Run the system, or run your mouth. One will protect you, the other will bury you. The words struck like flint, a spark. Passengers shifted, leaning in, hungry for the strike that would follow. Douglas didn't back down. He doubled down. Security will escort you off at the next stop. Until then, you remain under watch. The attendant smirked, victorious in her small world. Naomi didn't look at her. She didn't need to. She sat still, anchored, while the weight of injustice grew heavier by the second. The cabin was no longer quiet. It was waiting. Naomi didn't move. Not when Douglas crossed his arms. Not when the attendant sneered beside him. Not even when the whispers around her turned into full sentences. She looks guilty. Why isn't she saying anything? Maybe they're right she doesn't belong. Every word pressed against her skin, but her silence pressed back harder. She knew this game. She had been here before different rooms, same verdict pronounced before evidence. She adjusted her sweater collar where the attendant's hand had wrinkled it. That was her only movement, and somehow it was louder than shouting. The purser leaned down, close enough that his cologne's sharp chemical burned her nose. "You could make this easier," he whispered. "Move to economy until we sort this out. Save yourself the embarrassment." Embarrassment. The word rang through her bones like it always had. At 16, standing in a hotel lobby in Charlotte, told to wait outside because guests only. At 28, brushed off at a dealership. You don't look like someone who drives this car. Every slight had etched itself into her memory, not as wounds but as chapters. Tonight, another page was being written at 30,000 feet. She didn't answer him. Instead, she inhaled slow, steady, unbroken. The cabin heard it, felt it. That kind of calm wasn't weakness, it was warning. The young woman in purple lowered her phone briefly. "Why isn't she yelling?" she whispered to the man beside her. He shook his head, voice hushed but certain. "Because she doesn't have to." Douglas straightened, frustrated by her restraint. "Do you understand? Silence makes you look guilty." Naomi finally turned her head toward him, eyes steady, voice low but carrying. Silence makes you reveal yourself." The words slid into the air like a quiet verdict. The passengers shifted again. Some frowned, unsettled. Others nodded, catching the edge of truth. From the back of first class, a child's voice asked innocently, "Mom, why are they being mean to her?" The mother hushed him, but her eyes betrayed discomfort. The questions were spreading. The attendant snapped, desperate to reclaim authority. "Security will handle her at the gate. She'll be escorted off like the fraud she islanded." Naomi's gaze didn't waver. She lowered her hands to the armrest, fingers curling until the leather groaned beneath her grip. Not fear, not surrender. Patience forged into steel. The cabin was thick now, heavy with expectation. One spark away from fire, she closed her eyes briefly, as though hearing an echo from her past. Her father's voice, steady as he sorted mail through long nights. "You don't prove them wrong by shouting. You prove them wrong by lasting." When she opened them again, the room felt smaller, not because she shrank, but because her stillness filled it. And the crew too blind to see were the ones shrinking now. The cabin wasn't just quiet anymore. It was observant. Dozens of eyes, once indifferent, now lingered on Naomi. Some sharp with judgment, others edged with doubt, and just a few bright with recognition that something wasn't right. The woman in purple raised her phone again, this time higher, deliberate. The red recording light glowed like a beacon in the dim cabin. A murmur rolled across the rows. "She's filming," Douglas noticed. His jaw tightened. "Turn that off," he snapped. "Passengers are not authorized to record crew matters." But the young woman didn't lower it. She met his eyes, voice trembling but audible. "Then stop giving us something worth recording." Gasps scattered. A man in a navy blazer leaned over the aisle, whispering, "She's right. This doesn't look like procedure." And another phone rose, then another. Screens lifted like a silent protest. Every red dot a witness Naomi hadn't asked for but now had. The attendant's smirk faltered. "You people are making this worse." Naomi still hadn't moved beyond that steady posture, but her silence seemed to command the cameras as much as the scene. She finally tilted her chin toward the nearest lens and spoke with calm precision. "Record what's true, nothing more." Her tone wasn't pleading. It was directive. The phones didn't waver. In row 4, a young man with a laptop muttered, "If she scanned green, she's verified. That's digital fact." He angled his screen, showing the passenger beside him a log of boarding statuses he'd pulled from memory. His work in systems made him confident enough to challenge the lie. The passenger beside him nodded. So they're lying. Douglas bristled. That's enough. You're interfering with federal operations. His voice carried the weight of authority, but it cracked under the pressure of too many watching eyes. The purple shirt woman raised her phone higher. Then explain to us why her ticket was torn up before checking the system. Explain that. Silence from the crew. Their authority, once absolute, now dangled in the air, waiting to be snapped. A child's giggle broke the tension, innocent, unknowing. His mother whispered, "Stop," but her eyes never left Naomi. The question was written in her face. What if this was us? Naomi breathed evenly, letting the moment swell. Then she spoke again, louder this time, to the witnesses, not the crew. You don't need to defend me. Just remember what you saw. That's enough. The line carried like a spark across dry wood. Passengers exchanged nods, whispers firming into conviction. What had been isolated was now collective. Douglas glanced at the attendant, panic flickering under his stern face. He hissed, "Control the cabin." But the cabin was no longer theirs to control. Douglas straightened, his silver tie clip catching the overhead light as if it were a badge of power. His voice cut through the cabin, louder than the engines. This passenger is a fraud. She will not be served on this flight. No food, no drink, no access to first-class amenities, effective immediately. The declaration landed like a gavel, a few gasps, a mutter of, "What?" from somewhere near the back. Phones tilted closer. The attendant's smirk returned, bolstered by Douglas's decree. "You heard the purser?" she crowed, gesturing at Naomi as though displaying contraband. "This woman doesn't belong here." Naomi's eyes lifted slowly, but she said nothing. Her silence was not absence. It was strategy. The passengers felt it. That restraint wasn't weakness, it was waiting. A man in a gray suit rose again, his patience gone. "Excuse me, but I watched her board. I saw her scan. You're wrong." Douglas rounded on him, voice sharp as broken glass. "Sir, sit down immediately, or I'll have security escort you off at the next gate. You are interfering with crew authority." The man's jaw clenched, but he sank back down. His phone stayed up. His screen glowed red. From across the aisle, the young woman in purple spoke louder this time. "So, you're punishing her without evidence? That's what this is?" Douglas snapped, "Mind your own business." Naomi shifted, finally, not much, just her hand, lowering gently onto the armrest. The leather creaked under the slow press of her palm. Her gaze lifted to Douglas. "You confuse authority with truth," she said quietly. The cabin stilled again. The words weren't shouted, but they landed. Sharp, precise. The attendant scoffed, defensive. "Truth? The truth is you're a liar sitting in a stolen seat." Naomi tilted her head, eyes narrowing just enough. "Then prove it." The challenge lingered in the air, unanswered. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. A man whispered, "Why won't they check the system?" Another added, "Because they already know." Douglas's face tightened. His authority, once absolute, now wavered under the weight of too many witnesses, too many screens raised like mirrors reflecting his bias back at him. Still, he doubled down. "I don't need to prove anything to a con artist. Security is on standby. You will be removed when we land." The words cracked the cabin wide open. No more whispers, just open disbelief. Phones hovered higher. Murmurs surged like a tide. Naomi sat unmoved, her silence stretching across the cabin like steel wire pulled taut. Every second she refused to break, the crew's power unraveled further, and in that silence, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was no longer just a passenger dispute. This was a public trial, and the jury was recording. The silence didn't last. It never does. Power, when cornered, lashes out. The attendant snatched Naomi's carry-on from beneath the seat with a sudden jerk, the zipper scraping against metal. She hoisted it up for all to see like stolen goods on display. "This bag is suspicious property," she declared, voice shrill. "She's concealing evidence. Security will need to search it." Gasps rippled through the rows. A man muttered, "That's theft." Another whispered, "She didn't even ask permission." Naomi's jaw tightened, but she didn't reach for the bag. Not yet. Her stillness was deliberate, her silence deafening. Douglas stepped forward, grabbing the bag from the attendant. With a dramatic flourish, he unzipped it halfway before pausing. eyes scanning Naomi like a predator baiting prey. See? Nothing she has adds up. No designer labels. No premium ID. He pulled out a slim leather portfolio, holding it between two fingers as if it might burn him. Counterfeit, he sneered. Naomi's voice, quiet but edged with steel, finally cut in. You just opened a private possession without consent. That's a crime. Phones lifted higher. A passenger in row 5 said clearly, "We're recording everything, every second." The attendant's face flushed. "Record all you want. She won't make it past the next gate." And then came the call that snapped the cabin like a whip. Douglas yanked the handset from the wall, stabbing the intercom button. His voice thundered through the speakers for every ear on the plane. Security alert. Suspected fraud in first class. Request law enforcement at arrival gate. Possible identity theft. The words rolled heavy through the cabin, echoed in whispers, in disbelief. Fraud, theft, law enforcement. A woman clutched her child tighter. A man cursed under his breath. The purple shirt passenger shook her head, voice trembling. They just criminalized her without proof. Naomi sat rooted, hands folded over her lap now, her gaze steady on Douglas. You've crossed into fabrication, she said, and you've done it in front of witnesses. But Douglas only smiled, convinced of victory. You'll be in handcuffs before you reach baggage claim. That line struck the cabin like turbulence that dropped stomachs into shoes. The man in the gray suit finally shouted louder than before, "This is abuse of power." His phone's red light blinked steady, capturing every word. Douglas pointed at him, his voice snapping like glass under pressure. "One more word and you're off too." But the tide had shifted. Phones were up across the cabin now, a forest of glowing screens. Passengers weren't whispering anymore. They were speaking, protesting, asking questions. The crew's authority cracked audibly in the rising noise. And in the center of it all, Naomi sat untouched by the storm, anchored in silence. Her stillness wasn't surrender. It was a fuse, burning slow, inching closer to detonation. Because she knew what they didn't. This wasn't the climax. This was the prelude. The real reckoning was about to begin. The cabin buzzed with tension, voices rising, phones glowing red. Douglas still clutched Naomi's leather portfolio like contraband. But for the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. The noise was no longer his to command. Naomi moved at last. Not in anger, not in panic, but with deliberate calm. She reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out a sleek black phone. Her thumb slid across the screen with surgical precision. The glow of the display lit her face in cold light. "Activate protocol flight 1, she said evenly. The words weren't loud, but they carried like thunder. A second later, the call clicked live on speaker. A voice answered, crisp, efficient, unmistakably professional. "Protocol flight," one confirmed. "This is Clara speaking. Dr. Ellis, we're monitoring in real time. Go ahead." Gasps rippled through the cabin. The passengers looked from the phone to Naomi, suddenly aware that the quiet woman in cream was far more than the crew had assumed. Douglas sneered, clinging to his fading power. "Who do you think you're calling? Some lawyer friend? It won't save you." But Clara's voice cut through his derision, calm and unshaken. "Mr. Douglas, this line is now patched to the airline's corporate compliance office. Every word spoken in this cabin is being logged and time-stamped. That includes your call to security." The blood drained from his face. The attendant beside him fidgeted, eyes darting nervously to the rows of passengers filming. Naomi didn't look at Douglas. She spoke only to the phone. "Clara, mark the destruction of my boarding pass, the unlawful seizure of my bag, and the defamatory statements broadcast over the intercom." "Logged," Clara replied smoothly, "and flagged for executive review." The man in the gray suit muttered under his breath. "Executive review?" He glanced at the woman in purple. "Who is she?" The attendant snapped, desperate to restore control. "Enough games. That phone isn't proof of anything." Naomi's gaze slid toward her, steady and unflinching. "It isn't proof," she agreed softly. "It's documentation. The proof will come next." The phones in the cabin seemed to lean closer, recording not just an incident but a revelation unraveling in real time. Douglas tried once more, his voice cracking with forced authority. "You're bluffing. Security will drag you off this plane." Naomi's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper. "Number security will meet the plane, and when they do, they'll find the evidence points at you." Clara's voice chimed again, precise as a gavel. Dr. Ellis. Confirmation. All cabin audio is now uploaded to the incident board. Multiple passenger videos are already syncing. Corporate has eyes on this flight. The passengers erupted in murmurs. The woman in purple lowered her phone just enough to whisper, "She called her Dr. Ellis." Naomi sat back in her seat, composed, anchored. She folded her hands over her lap once more, her eyes never leaving Douglas. "You thought silence was surrender," she said, her voice calm, almost surgical. "It was strategy." The words didn't echo. They sank, heavy, final. And in that moment, the power in the cabin shifted. The hum of the engines filled the silence, but it was no longer background noise, it was a drum roll. Every eye in first class fixed on Naomi. Every phone lens pointed at her, waiting. Douglas still clutched the leather portfolio like a trophy, though his hands trembled. The attendant hovered beside him, her smirk fading by the second. Naomi finally leaned forward, her voice steady, calm, but heavy with gravity. "You wanted proof," she said. "Here at Island." She gestured lightly toward the phone on her tray table. Clara's voice came through instantly, like she had been waiting for the cue. "Passenger verification complete. Confirmed identity. Dr. Naomi Ellis. Majority shareholder. Horizon Global. Current controlling stake. 28% of Horizon Airlines." The cabin erupted. Gasps. Murmurs. A man 2 rows back whispered, "She owns the airline." Another muttered, "Oh my God." The attendant staggered back a step as if the words had shoved her. That can't be true." Naomi's gaze cut through her like glass. "You tore up a boarding pass issued in my name. You accused the majority shareholder of fraud. You rifled through my property in front of witnesses. That is what's true." Douglas tried to hold his composure, but his voice faltered. "Shareholders don't fly like this. They don't dress like what?" Naomi's tone sharpened, slicing the air. "Like me? Like a black woman in a sweater? You confuse wealth with costume. That's your blindness, not my disguise." The words landed like a gavel. Phones captured every syllable. The woman in purple lowered her phone just long enough to breathe. "This is history." Naomi rose slowly from her seat, not rushed, not dramatic, simply inevitable. Standing, she seemed taller than the aisle itself. Her presence filled the cabin until even the hum of the engines felt quieter. "You told me I didn't belong here," she said, eyes sweeping across Douglas, the attendant, the silent captain in the aisle. "But this cabin, this plane, this airline, it belongs to me." The gasp that followed wasn't just shock. It was a release, a shift, as if the entire cabin had exhaled the lie they'd been fed and inhaled the truth that now stood before them. Douglas's face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed. No defense came, only silence. The attendant's smirk had dissolved completely, replaced by panic. She took a step back, then another, as if distance could undo the damage. Naomi turned her gaze to the passengers, steady, almost gentle. "You've all just witnessed what happens when silence meets arrogance. You've seen power mistake itself for truth, and you've seen it corrected." Clara's voice rang again, final and sharp. "Corporate confirms full authority to act, Dr. Ellis. Standing by for your directive." Naomi folded her hands in front of her, her expression calm, composed, but undeniable. "Then let's begin." The truth didn't land quietly. It detonated. Phones trembled in raised hands, catching every frame. The murmur that had lingered in the cabin surged into a storm, gasps, whispers, even laughter at the absurdity of what had just been revealed. "She owns the airline?" Someone whispered near the back. "No way, she's their boss." "And." The attendant's knees buckled as if the carpet had been pulled from under her. She stumbled backward, colliding with the galley wall. Her lips moved soundlessly, hunting for words that wouldn't come. Douglas's silver tie clip no longer gleamed with authority. His face had drained to paper white, his jaw slack. He looked like a man staring at his own obituary, written live on every phone in the cabin. Passengers didn't stay silent now. They spoke freely, loudly, with conviction. "You tore up her ticket? You called the owner a fraud. This is going viral the second we land." A ripple of applause started from the middle rows, hesitant at first, then swelling. Hands clapped against the hum of the engines, a rhythm that grew until it filled the cabin. The sound wasn't just celebration, it was condemnation. A public trials verdict delivered in real time. Naomi stood rooted in the aisle, her presence anchoring the chaos. She didn't smile. She didn't raise her voice. Her stillness was enough. The woman in purple lowered her phone for the first time all flight. Her eyes locked on Naomi with something like awe. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew she wasn't ordinary." The captain, silent until now, shifted uncomfortably. His uniform felt like a costume suddenly too heavy to wear. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, trapped between loyalty to his crew and the undeniable truth unraveling before him. Douglas finally found his voice, but it betrayed him, thin, shaky, stripped of command. This can be explained." Naomi's gaze turned to him, steady as stone. "Number, it can only be recorded." The passengers cheered. Someone shouted, "Say it louder." Another added, "Justice at 30,000 feet." The attendant pressed herself into the corner, her earlier smirk now replaced by silent tears. She tried to hide her face from the cameras, but the cameras didn't flinch. Douglas attempted to regain control, his hands trembling as he gestured. "Everyone calm down." But calm was gone. Authority had slipped from his grip, and the cabin no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the truth, to Naomi. The applause surged again, louder, harder, unstoppable, and in that thunder, Naomi's stillness grew even larger. She wasn't just reclaiming dignity, she was redefining the room. The purser, the attendant, the captain, they weren't the center anymore. They were footnotes. Naomi Ellis was the headline. The applause ebbed into silence, but not the kind that fades. This silence was charged, waiting for the final blow. Naomi lifted her phone again, her thumb poised above the screen. She didn't need to raise her voice. The cabin had already learned to lean in when she spoke. "Clara," she said evenly, "log disciplinary action. Effective immediately. Suspend Purser Douglas and Flight Attendant Ward. Terminate all flight privileges, revoke system access, and mark for legal review." The response was crisp, merciless. "Confirmed, Dr. Ellis. Executing now." A soft chime echoed from Douglas's hip. He fumbled at his badge, pulling it free. The green light that had always blinked steady now flashed red, denied. He tapped it against the galley scanner. Beep. Access refused. Again. Beep. Refused. His face collapsed in real time, authority dissolving into nothing but panic. Ward, the attendant, tried hers next. Red. Locked out. She clutched the plastic rectangle like it had betrayed her. Her earlier smirk was gone, replaced by trembling hands. Passengers gasped. Some even laughed in disbelief. Phones captured every second close-ups of badges failing, of faces draining of power. Naomi didn't move closer. She didn't need to. Her words alone reached across the cabin like a sentence handed down. "You don't decide who belongs here. Not anymore." "Oh," Douglas tried one last time, desperation cracking his tone. You can't do this mid-flight. There are procedures." Naomi's gaze cut through him. "Procedures. You invoked that word to justify abuse. Now I invoke it to enforce accountability. That's the difference." The line carried like steel, striking through the hum of the engines. Passengers cheered again, some clapping, others chanting her name. "Ellis! Ellis!" The captain stood frozen, caught in the crossfire. His badge still glowed green, but the weight of silence pressed heavy on him. He cleared his throat, voice small. "Dr. Ellis, should I assume command of the cabin?" Naomi turned her head slowly, her gaze steady. "Command belongs to competence, not cowardice." The words cut deeper than dismissal. They stripped him bare before the cabin. He lowered his head, unable to answer. Douglas's lips quivered. Ward's tears streaked down her face. Their uniforms no longer looked like symbols of order. They looked like costumes ripped apart by truth. Naomi set her phone down, folding her hands calmly. Her voice, steady as ever, delivered the verdict. "This flight will land as scheduled, but you won't land with authority. Not again. Not ever." The cabin roared with approval. Phones flashed. History was being recorded mid-air, in real time, etched into every device. And in that moment, everyone knew. Justice had just boarded the flight. The storm had passed, but the cabin was still electric. Phones were lowered now, but only because passengers wanted to look with their own eyes, not through screens, at the woman who had just dismantled an empire of arrogance without raising her voice. Douglas slumped into an empty jump seat, his badge still flashing red like a scarlet letter. Ward sobbed quietly into her hands, the uniform she once wore with pride, now nothing more than fabric stripped of authority. Naomi remained standing in the aisle, composed, unshaken. She looked not at them, but at the passengers who had borne witness. Her gaze swept the cabin, row by row, until every eye met hers. "You saw what happened here tonight?" she began, her voice low, steady, but carrying to the farthest seat. "You saw how quickly judgment is passed when appearance replaces truth, how silence is mistaken for weakness, how arrogance convinces itself it is justice." The hum of the engine seemed to fade beneath her words. No one stirred. No one dared. She paused, letting the weight of silence fill the air again before she continued. "But you also saw something else. You saw how silence can become strength. You saw patience sharpen into power, and you saw what happens when truth finally speaks." A ripple of murmurs swept through the rows. A man whispered, "She didn't shout once." Another added, "And still, she won." Naomi inhaled, slow and deliberate, before delivering the line that would leave the cabin changed forever. "I don't need to shout to prove I belong. I don't need to record my dignity to make it real. I am the result of every attempt to erase me, and I am still here." The words landed like iron wrapped in velvet. Passengers erupted into applause, some rising to their feet, their claps echoing against the cabin walls. The woman in purple wiped tears from her eyes, still filming, whispering to her phone. "This is bigger than a flight. This is justice." Naomi sat back down in her seat, calm once more. She adjusted her sweater, folded her hands neatly, and closed her eyes, as if settling into rest. The applause thundered on, rolling through the cabin like waves. Even the engines seemed to harmonize with it, carrying the sound through the sky. When it finally faded, all that remained was the steady presence of one truth. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it waits, and sometimes when arrogance digs its own grave, it simply stands. Naomi Ellis had stood, and the world had watched.